It sounds almost impossible, almost like something out of a story that nobody would believe, that two countries currently trying to erase each other from the map were once the closest of allies. Yes, we are talking about Iran and Israel. And this was not some casual surface-level friendship. These were leaders who met in secret, who exchanged gifts, who signed hidden agreements, and who built an alliance so deep and so productive that it became a model for strategic partnerships in the entire Middle East. But the most shocking part of this entire story, the detail that stops people cold when they hear it for the first time, is this. The nuclear program that America and Israel are trying to destroy today, the one that has brought the world to the edge of war, was actually given to Iran by America and Israel themselves. How did that happen? How did this friendship begin? Who was jealous of it? Why did Israel supply weapons to Iran even after the Islamic Revolution? And what was the exact moment when this deep and complex friendship finally turned into the bitter, dangerous enmity we see today? Welcome back to ZMTV. To understand the roots of this friendship, we need to go back to a Middle East that looked completely different from the one we know today. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled over most of this region for centuries, collapsed in 1922 after World War I. In its place, British influence spread across the region and Arab nationalism began to rise. The Arabs had just broken free from Ottoman rule, and they wanted their own independent nations. In fact, one of the reasons the Ottoman Empire lost World War I was that the Arabs had secretly sided with the British on the promise that after victory they would be allowed to build their own countries. But alongside the British and the Arabs, there was a third major power in this region that had a serious problem with Arab nationalism, and that was Iran. At that time, Iran was a powerful country, and Iranians historically looked down on Arabs and considered themselves culturally superior. The Shah of Iran believed that if the Arab countries united, they would become a direct threat to Iranian power and influence. There were two specific fears driving this. First, Iran's dominance over the Persian Gulf would be undermined, especially since the Arabs had already started calling it the Arabian Gulf instead of the Persian Gulf, a seemingly small linguistic detail that carried enormous political weight. Second, Iran was majority Shia Muslim, while the Arabs were predominantly Sunni Muslim. Although both are Muslim, history shows that there has always been a quiet but intense competition between the two sides over who truly represents Islam and who leads the Muslim world. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi feared that growing Sunni influence could eventually reach inside Iran and threaten his throne. Nobody could have predicted, in those turbulent years after World War I, that Iran, finding itself increasingly isolated in the Middle East, was about to find the most unexpected ally imaginable. That moment came in 1948, the historic year when the United Nations announced the creation of the State of Israel. The moment Israel was declared, its neighboring Arab countries decided that an injustice had been done to the Palestinians and launched a full military attack. This war threatened Israel's very existence from its very first day. But for the Shah of Iran, this Arab-Israeli conflict presented something else entirely. It presented an opportunity. Iran did not have a fundamental problem with Israel as a state. What Iran had a problem with was the rising power of the Arab world, and now the Arab countries were all focused on destroying Israel. The enemy of Iran's enemy was beginning to look like a potential friend. On the other side, Israel was quickly realizing that surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors, it desperately needed friends who were not Arab. This thinking was formalized into official policy by Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, who developed what became known as the peripheral doctrine. His argument was straightforward. Israel is a small state completely surrounded by Arab countries that want to destroy it. Therefore, Israel must build strong friendships with the neighbors of its enemies, the non-Arab states on the outer edge of the Arab world. And on that map, the biggest and most important neighbor of the Arabs was Iran. This was the Israeli policy that laid the very first foundation of the Iran-Israel friendship. The first and most visible result of Ben-Gurion's peripheral doctrine came in 1950. Iran became the second Muslim-majority country in the world, after Turkey, to give de facto recognition to Israel. Iran sent a formal letter to Israel through the Swiss government, not only accepting Israel's existence, but actually offering friendship. This was not an official diplomatic recognition, but rather a secret agreement that somehow everyone knew about, an open secret. The world assumed Iran did not recognize Israel, but in reality the Shah had allowed Israel to open a mission in Tehran, and this mission was enormous, operating in every practical way exactly like a full embassy. There was no Israeli flag outside. The word embassy was never used. People knew what it was. Oh, but officially it was called the Israeli Trade Office. This quiet, deniable, but fully functional arrangement set the tone for everything that followed. Now, let us understand why the Shah, leader of a Muslim-majority country, chose to side with Israel. There were three major reasons. The first was modernization. The Shah wanted to strengthen his monarchy and transform Iran into a modern industrial powerhouse. And for that, he needed advanced technology and expertise that Israel could provide. The second reason was fear of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was becoming the great champion of Arab nationalism across the region. The Shah was genuinely worried that Nasser's next target could be Iran, and that this growing pan-Arab movement could destabilize his rule. The third, and perhaps most decisive reason, was the Shah's extremely close relationship with the United States. In 1953, when Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had tried to reduce the Shah's powers, it was the CIA that intervened, helped stage a coup, and saved the Shah's throne. After that, the Shah felt deeply indebted to America and was unwilling to go against American wishes on anything significant. And America very much wanted Iran and Israel to be friends. The Shah was also deeply paranoid about his own people. He created a secret police force called SAVAK, whose job was to monitor, arrest, and eliminate anyone who spoke against his rule. And here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. It was Israel's intelligence agency Mossad that trained SAVAK. Mossad agents taught SAVAK how to conduct surveillance, how to run interrogations, and how to identify and neutralize political threats. Intelligence sharing between SAVAK and Mossad became routine. The two agencies worked together to target communist groups and Arab militant organizations operating in the region. Beyond intelligence cooperation, Iranian Air Force pilots received training inside Israel. Israel supplied Iran with advanced weapons and military technology that the Arab world could not even imagine at the time. The two countries collaborated on missile technology development and signed research agreements covering nuclear weapons technology. That nuclear program, the one that has become the central crisis of our time, the one that Israel and America are today desperate to stop, was originally started with their own help. In 1957, American President Dwight Eisenhower launched a program called Atoms for Peace, whose purpose was to provide nuclear technology to American allies around the world so they could generate cheap electricity. America gave Iran its first nuclear research reactor in 1967, which was installed at Tehran University. And here is the detail that makes history feel almost darkly comic. At that time, it was Israeli scientists who trained the Iranian nuclear researchers, the very scientists who are today being hunted down and assassinated one by one. Now, let us understand why the Shah, leader of a Muslim-majority country, chose to side with Israel. There were three major reasons. The first was modernization. The Shah wanted to strengthen his monarchy and transform Iran into a modern industrial powerhouse. And for that, he needed advanced technology and expertise that Israel could provide. The second reason was fear of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was becoming the great champion of Arab nationalism across the region. The Shah was genuinely worried that his next target could be Iran, and that this growing pan-Arab movement could destabilize his rule. The third, and perhaps most decisive reason, was the Shah's extremely close relationship with the United States. In 1953, when Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had tried to reduce the Shah's powers, it was the CIA that intervened, helped stage a coup, and saved the Shah's throne. After that, the Shah felt deeply indebted to America and was unwilling to go against American wishes on anything significant. And America very much wanted Iran and Israel to be friends. The Shah was also deeply paranoid about his own people. He created a secret police force called SAVAK, whose job was to monitor, arrest, and eliminate anyone who spoke against his rule. And here is where the story becomes even more fascinating. It was Israel's intelligence agency Mossad that trained SAVAK. Mossad agents taught SAVAK how to conduct surveillance, how to run interrogations, and how to identify and neutralize political threats. Intelligence sharing between SAVAK and Mossad became routine. The two agencies worked together to target communist groups and Arab militant organizations operating in the region. Beyond intelligence cooperation, Iranian Air Force pilots received training inside Israel. Israel supplied Iran with advanced weapons and military technology that the Arab world could not even imagine at the time. The two countries collaborated on missile technology development and signed research agreements covering nuclear weapons technology. That nuclear program, the one that has become the central crisis of our time, the one that Israel and America are today desperate to stop, was originally started with their own help. In 1957, American President Dwight Eisenhower launched a program called Atoms for Peace, whose purpose was to provide nuclear technology to American allies around the world so they could generate cheap electricity. America gave Iran its first nuclear research reactor in 1967, which was installed at Tehran University. And here is the detail that makes history feel almost darkly comic. At that time, it was Israeli scientists who trained the Iranian nuclear researchers, the very scientists who are today being hunted down and assassinated one by one. The friendship between Iran and Israel was not only a military alliance. The economic dimension of this partnership was in many ways its strongest pillar. Israel needed oil. The Arab countries had completely boycotted Israel from their oil supplies. Iran had enormous oil reserves and wanted to be a friend, but there was a geographic problem. Getting Iranian oil to Israel was almost impossible. If Iranian oil tankers tried to sail from the Persian Gulf through the Red Sea and then through the Suez Canal to reach Israel, they would be blocked because the Suez Canal was controlled by Egypt, which stood firmly with the Arabs and would never allow such a shipment. The land route was equally impossible, since between Iran and Israel lie Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, all Arab countries that would never cooperate. The solution that Iran and Israel came up with together was one of the most creative pieces of economic infrastructure of that era. Israel has a port on the Gulf of Aqaba called Eilat. The two countries built a secret pipeline that ran from Eilat all the way to the port of Ashkelon on the Mediterranean Sea. This became known as the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline. Iranian oil tankers would leave Karg Island, travel through the Red Sea, bypass the Suez Canal entirely by entering the Gulf of Aqaba, unload their oil at Israel's Eilat port, and then that oil would be pumped through the pipeline to Ashkelon on the Mediterranean, from where it could be shipped directly to Europe without any Arab obstruction. This arrangement gave Israel a reliable oil supply and gave Iran access to European markets that it could not otherwise reach without going through Arab-controlled waterways. The pipeline was owned 50% by Iran and 50% by Israel. This was not just infrastructure. This was a brotherhood built in steel and crude oil, specifically designed to break the Arab economic monopoly in the region. The friendship was so deep and so personal that the Shah of Iran and Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion would meet in secret. When Ben-Gurion landed at Tehran airport, he would wear a disguise to avoid media attention. By 1970, the Israeli trade mission in Tehran, which was functionally an embassy, was fully active and staffed with Israeli engineers, doctors, and military advisors. Israel taught Iranian farmers modern irrigation techniques. Direct flights ran between the two countries. This period is considered the golden era of the Iran-Israel relationship. It was during this golden era that the Shah threw what is still remembered as the most expensive birthday party in human history. On October 26, 1971, the Shah celebrated his 52nd birthday and simultaneously marked the 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. For this celebration, an entire miniature city was constructed in the desert at a cost of more than $100 million, even by the standards of that era. A special runway was built just for the event. Kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers from across the world were flown in. Food was brought by private aircraft directly from the famous Maxim's restaurant in Paris. The Israeli prime minister was not invited, deliberately, so that the friendship could remain secret. But although no Israeli leader appeared on the stage, Mossad worked directly with the Shah's security team to plan the entire security operation for the event, ensuring that no attack could take place. Even the absence of the Israeli PM from the guest list did not create any tension between the two countries. For the next several years, the friendship continued as strong as ever, and then came the day that changed everything. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution swept through Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah, sent him into exile, and declared Iran an Islamic republic. Within days of taking power, Khomeini announced that Israel was an enemy of Islam and that the Shah had been a traitor to his own people. Shortly after this declaration, the Israeli trade mission in Tehran was stormed and taken over. A Palestinian flag was raised over the building. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat arrived in Tehran, and Khomeini stood beside him and declared that this building was no longer Israeli property but was now the embassy of Palestine. That was the moment when the story of the Iran-Israel friendship seemed to end, but it did not end there. History had one more extraordinary chapter to write first. 1 year after the Islamic Revolution in 1980, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. Suddenly, Iran found itself in desperate need of weapons, fighting a massive conventional war against a heavily armed neighbor. And in that moment of desperate need, something almost unbelievable happened. Israel began secretly supplying weapons to the Islamic Republic of Iran, the same Khomeini government that had called Israel an enemy of Islam, the same revolutionary government that had replaced the Israeli flag with a Palestinian one. They took Israeli weapons, and Israel provided them. For 8 years, the Iran-Iraq war continued, and throughout those 8 years, weapons continued to arrive from Israel. Israel's calculation was cold and strategic. By arming Iran, it was weakening Iraq, a hostile Arab neighbor. The enemy of the enemy was once again, briefly and secretly, a kind of friend. After the Islamic Revolution, the new Iranian government dismantled almost everything the Shah had built, including Savak, the oil pipeline, and the Israeli trade mission. But there was one thing that Khomeini chose not to destroy. One thing that had been gifted to Iran by America and Israel that the Islamic Republic decided to keep and expand: the nuclear program, the research reactor, the trained scientists, the technological foundation. All of it was kept and built upon. Then in 1988, the Iran-Iraq war ended. And when it ended, Israel found itself looking at the Middle East with new eyes. The threat from Iraq had been managed, but now something else was coming into focus. Iran's nuclear program, which had been started with American and Israeli assistance, was now in the hands of Islamic revolutionaries who had explicitly declared their hostility to Israel's existence. The calculations that had made the friendship useful, the shared Arab enemy, the mutual economic benefits, the Cold War against communism, all of those calculations no longer applied. What remained was an Iran with nuclear ambitions and an ideology that positioned Israel as its primary enemy. From that point forward, what began as the golden era of friendship transformed into what analysts today call a shadow war, assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, cyber attacks on nucleus, our facilities. Proxy conflicts fought through militias and allied groups across multiple countries, sanctions, blockades, airstrikes, and now in 2026, an open military conflict with the Strait of Hormuz at its center. Two countries that once met in secret to build missiles together now fight openly over the skies of the Middle East. The pipeline that once carried Iranian oil to Israeli ports is long gone. The Mossad agents who once trained Iranian intelligence officers now direct operations against Iranian nuclear sites. The Israeli scientists who once educated Iranian nuclear researchers are now part of the effort to ensure that the knowledge they helped create never becomes a weapon pointed at Israel. History rarely moves in straight lines. It loops back on itself, contradicts itself, and produces ironies so sharp they almost feel deliberate. The story of Iran and Israel is perhaps the greatest of these ironies. Two nations that built each other up, shared each other's secrets, protected each other's leaders, and invested in each other's futures, now locked in a conflict whose roots run directly back to the friendship they once shared. The nuclear crisis of today was born in the cooperation of yesterday, and the weapons being used to fight this war were developed in part by the very alliance that the war is now destroying. That is the story of how the deepest friendship in the modern Middle East became its most dangerous enmity